just shown up. What's happened? I said, maybe they've all forgotten because no reminder came and all that. And I had sent it to our guys, and I was
Okay.
here till 3:45. Then I said, okay, let me leave. So I left. I was at the office. Then I went back home. And then I just checked the phone at 4 o'clock and I saw Franco's message. So sorry, guys. This is as we grow older, things like these happen. So my apologies. All right.
So, yeah.
Let me just see who all are here. We've got Edgar, Yogesh, Sunny, Manish, Pal, Ryan, Franco, Neil, Gurmeet, Christy, Prashant, Joash, Prasanta, Andrew. Okay, we're missing at least 10 people.
More than that. But many of them said they will listen to the
Okay.
YouTube. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just begin.
Yeah.
And Ryan, would you like to just open in prayer for us this afternoon, please? Thank you.
Yes, Lord Father, we just want to thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for this, Lord, morning. We had a wonderful time, Lord Father, right across various churches and with your presence, Lord. We just want to commit this afternoon, evening to you, Lord God, as we, Lord, discuss about finances and how to look after those who are shepherding churches, Lord Father. Just pray
Yes.
that, Lord, even as Colin stirred our hearts, Lord, that God is thinking last week, Lord God, and Lord, at least I was, Lord, convicted, Lord, being trustee, Lord, having know my roles and responsibilities. And Lord, just help us, Lord, to dig deeper and, Lord, to really work things through and understand how do we really look after, Lord, pastors and leaders and, Lord, see that they are well compensated, Lord, those serving you, Lord, God, those who served you for so many years, Lord. So I just pray that you would just lead us and help us and Lord, give us your wisdom. We ask the Holy Spirit to help us, help Colin, Lord, as he, Lord, takes us through this, Lord, evening. We ask you, this, Father, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. So we'll do a quick review of some of the things we covered last time. And just putting our things together here, yeah. And so if you remember last time, we spoke about the care of the Levites in the Old Testament. Okay, we said that God had given them the tithes, the 10%. It was for them and for their children. Okay. Anything else you remember about what God had commanded in the Old Testament? Anybody want to chip in?
They are worthy of double honor.
Yeah, that was in the New Testament. Thank you, this thing. But what was written in Deuteronomy 18:21 was the finest of grain. It wasn't leftovers that were to be given, but the best portion was to be given. All right? And I also said the Levites were only about 5% of the population. So 95% took care of 5%. That was kind of the ratio. And then we see that the same thing is repeated in the New Testament, where Jesus said it, Paul said it, that and we looked at some New Testament scriptures. And we said 1 Corinthians 9:14, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. Okay? And again in chapter 9, Paul reminds us, you shall not muzzle an ox when it is treads out the grain. And he's saying, is it that God is concerned about oxen? No, he's not talking about that. He's talking about people who share the gospel. And so he said, the principle is this: if we have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much to reap material things from you? Okay? And that's what he's saying. And so forth. And then, of course, we have the one that Christy brought out, where we're saying, how can we quantify what is to be given? And it says, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those whose job is preaching and teaching. So that gives us a clue. And what does honor mean there? Anybody?
Honorarium.
That's right. That's where we get honorarium from. Okay, what it's talking about is a financial benefit. It's not just talking about, honoring them, although that is part of it, or recognizing them. It's honorarium. And Galatians 6:6 gives us another clue. It says, one who's taught the word must share all good things with the one who teaches. So we're talking about a similar level of living. Okay. Okay. That was just a basic. So is everybody clear on the biblical basis of looking after full-time ministers? Are we, because unless the biblical basis is clear, we can't move forward. Everybody clear on that? Yeah, thumbs up.
Yeah. Yep.
Great. And then we said, we've got to look at practically how to do. Isn't John Gazala here?
He is in his hometown because his brother's some property, or his parents some property need to be sold. He has to sign. I think he is not here. Yeah.
Okay, he's not there. Okay, fine. So then the next thing we looked at was, we said, we got an example of a principle just to help us work out a salary calculation. Yeah. And we came up with something. And I think that was an interesting discussion because there were different viewpoints, and we realized, like I remember somebody saying, housing allowance for Bombay, 2-bedroom, 10,000. And that was quickly corrected by some others who said, what? So sometimes what happens is, we can throw in figures that are totally unrealistic, and we think a pastor can live on love and fresh air, and that's what it is. So we need to be realistic in what we are putting down. And so last time we nearly completed the workshop where we came up with some figures, right? And we don't need to get into that right now, but just that was to give us an idea of the things to consider when we consider compensation. Okay? And we'll see where we take it up. We take it, we carry on this week. Okay. So this week, we're going to look at a few more things. And, okay. Let me ask you some questions. Okay. Now, so you, as a trustee or a person who's empowered to care for the pastor, we'll come to how we're getting empowered with that. We have 3 options. Okay. And that option number 1 is, great, there is money in the church kitty. Okay, that's a good option to have. So let's say your pastor is currently getting X, okay, and you realize you've been grossly underpaying him and it needs to get to 2X. Fine. Everybody with me in this exercise? Okay, fine. You feel as a committee, you decided, you say, hey, we've been paying so little, it needs to go to 2X. Now, there are 3 options that are available. Number 1, there is money in the church kitty. So what's the action to take if that is the case?
Use it to pay.
Yeah, use it. If there is the money, great. And you feel this is the right thing, do it. All right? There's no issue about that. And one thing you may consider is you may consider giving some arrears as well. Okay? So that's something to note. Okay.
I think, Colin, just one thing, the reality also is that while there is money, the trustees might not be fully aware that there is money. So, I think that sort of visibility probably will also, help.
Yeah. But why would the trustees not be aware?
I don't know, at least from my experience in the past.
Okay, Ryan, I'll answer that question about trustees. Maybe straight after this about what is the role of the trustees. Okay, and we'll look at that. Okay, so option 1, there is money. Ryan brought out some things that could, but if there is money, then if you're empowered to take the decision to do it. And just keep in mind, it's good to consider arrears as well. All right, that's where. Number 2, option number 2, there is no money. Okay, there is no money, but you feel there are sufficient people in the church. So how would you handle that? Somebody else? Thoughts?
I think you can teach the church about giving.
Excellent. Okay, I get some. I guess as my volume is low. Is that so?
No, I can hear you well.
Fine.
Yeah. Fine.
Okay, so option number 2 is there is no money, but there are sufficient people. Okay, so who said that about teach them on giving?
I said that Ryan.
Ryan said. Okay, so that's absolutely right. We need to teach our people the biblical basis for giving. Okay.
So on this note, Colin, would it be helpful for somebody from outside to do it rather than the pastor doing it himself?
Yeah,
Also other problems with that.
that's also possible. That's also possible. You know, sometimes it's a bit embarrassing to talk about giving because in the sense of we personally benefit from it. You know, so it's good to get somebody else, but sometimes you got to bite the bullet and humbly share, because at the end of the day we are sharing God's word. It's not our word.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know I've done it. I've done series on giving at Word of Grace. In fact, today I preached on giving. Okay. So anyway, so that's the other thing. So I'll tell you what, we've got to challenge everybody to give, even the poor.
Yeah.
Okay. Recently I was talking to somebody and I was shocked. That person has not been giving. You know, and anyway, so we won't get into too much detail, but so we've got to challenge our even the poor to give. I remember Nigel Ring saying this. Nigel Ring said this. He says, "The poor are there to help the destitute." The poor are there to help the destitute. Now the context was, of course, he had gone into a community, and they see a white guy coming into a community that is impoverished, and they think, okay, he's going to bring in all the money and do all the job. This is social work. And he challenged him. He says, "What are you going to give?" He said, "Us give?" He says, "Yeah, the poor, I know you guys are poor, are there to help the destitute who have nothing." So if there's one thing we've got to do is we've got to challenge our people to give, no matter what their income level. The rich need to be challenged to give. Often they are the ones who don't give. And the poor need to be challenged to give, because they also can think, I'm not doing too well, I don't have anything. But there is an amazing blessing tied to giving. All right? So as Ryan said, if you feel that it's a bit awkward for you to preach, invite somebody to preach on giving. Great. So we've got to teach our people to give. Okay.
Can I just share?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I think my 22 years of leading the church, I personally, I don't think I have ever preached on giving in my church, but I have asked others to come and preach. I had 2-3 people to come and preach, but I have preached in other people's church, churches to give. And I think it's a journey of faith. You got to pray, you got to believe, and yet, and I would teach it in the foundation course. That's the different, preach from the pulpit. I don't think I have preached, but I have, let others preach. And even this poor thing, I remember we had one church called I think it's Holy. Whatever, it's led by a man called Robin in Kerala. He had 450 people or 500 people, but their offering was very little, And he asked me once, he said, "Will you come and preach on giving?" And the thing about him is that I was preaching in English and he was translating. So his translation would take more time because he was adding his own stuff, And I know, I know Malayalam, and I was struggling. I said, he's just bashing them. He said, give.
No.
And but I gave them a simple stuff. Because most of them are from the Hindu background, poor background. And I just challenged them and said, if you go to your temple, what do you give? Coconut, this, that, how much you would spend a day? And they came out with some, every day they were spending 20 rupees, 30 rupees. And I said, you add up and give it in the end of the month, that much, 600 rupees, or 500 rupees. And his testimony was, after I preached, from next month onwards, his tithes began to increase because the poor people were giving. Until that time, it was a very few rich people.
Praise God.
So,
Praise
go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, even the poor in the church, because giving is proportionate, right? Whether you earn 5,000 a month or 50,000 or 5 lakhs, it's all proportionate. You know, so a person who earns 5,000 can give 500. That's fine. You know, and what we must realize is there is blessing in giving. Jesus himself said it's more blessed to give than to receive. So we are stopping the blessing coming to those people, you know, when we don't teach them about giving. Now, of course, we've got to be gracious about it and do that. Okay, so I just, and then there is the third scenario, which is this. There's no money and there are not enough people. What's the solution to that?
Fast and pray.
Yeah, fast and pray. Okay.
Grow the church.
Yeah, maybe
Grow
some
the
other.
church. Grow the church. That's what we need to do. We need to make sure we grow the church. Okay. And so I'll just quickly drop in our story there. You know, when we moved to Pune, we were supported for 2 years by Living Word Church. And then we were going to be on our own. And we were barely 20 people meeting. And so we said, listen, if we don't grow this church, how are we going to survive? You trust God and do all that. And so we did two things. One is we were very evangelistic. Because what are you going to do? You've got to just reach out to people. So anything that moved anywhere, we would go and talk to them, you know, and try to befriend them. But through it, we saw so many people come to be saved. All right? In a supermarket, in a cake shop, you know, it just pushed us out to be evangelists. That's what happened. And so that was one thing. So keep that in mind. You know, we need to be evangelistic, and that throws us out on God, because we can't convert anybody, but God has to touch hearts, but it forces us to go outward. Secondly, it involves working very hard. Now, one of the things about full-time ministry is, how many of you like sales? You know, all this buy one, get one free? Yeah, you get those things. Now in full-time ministry, it's like this. You hire one, you get two free. So you and your wife, you know, get, isn't that true? Franco and others. Okay, so that's what happened. So we had Nawaz and myself who were fully involved, you know, and we said we've got to do something. So one of the things we did is we started a business. This was long ago, 20 years ago. And that meant, because we needed that to support us as well, the church was still strong and small. And so for that business, like Paul, we worked night and day, long hours to provide for ourselves and the church. Okay, as the business grew, we invested in equipment for the church and stuff for the church. There was no church office. Our home was a church office for 11 years. Okay, it's only in the 11th year that we got an office. And over again, we had to reinvent ourselves, you know, to do. You have no choice. You got to just say, what is needed? What can I do? And so we tried different things, and God's blessing was upon it. And we not only survived, but we thrived, you know. And so one of the challenges of leading a church and being a full-time thing is, like I said, 2 for the price of 1. So Nawaz, while managing the home and the kids and running a business, was also my secretary, administrator, website developer, blogger, everything, and without getting any pay for any of that. Okay, so whether it's so that's the reality. Okay, so you got to, when you consider full-time ministry, you've got to realize that it's not just you, but often your wife and children are also involved in this thing. And yeah, and when it's a small church plant, you know, we cannot expect to get a full salary because there aren't enough people. Okay, and you've got to do what it takes, and your wife, to survive. And this might mean taking up another part-time job, doing some business, doing something, and this thing. So I know there are several of us who have done something like that. Okay, so just to keep that in mind. Okay, so we've looked at these different scenarios.
Neil has raised his hand.
Sorry? Oh, Neil, go ahead.
Hey Colin, I just had a question in regards to, like, you know, the part where he said like obviously the wife is serving as well, right?
Yes.
And like how, how about, like, as a church providing for them as well, like, because the wife as well is looking after the church. She is handling, like, there are multiple things that they handle as the leader's wife. It's not that they're idle or away, but they're involved with having uh, I don't know, like, meetings and counseling, and there's so much as good as a leader who's actually leading the church. So it's like, I mean, when you see the vulnerability, how about consider them as well?
Yeah, Neil, what you're saying is bang on. Okay, so let me share something. Now, in the UK, from what I've seen, often in many cases, the wife is not involved in the ministry. Okay, so the husband. Let me rephrase that. It's how can I? Franco, you want to shed some light on this? You remember how it was? These guys, where oh, yeah.
Colin, I'm so sorry. Like, just to add to it, like, the reason I'm saying that, like, if I'm talking about my own church, I've seen Auntie Des.
Yeah.
She's always been there.
Sure, sure.
And, she's involved in
Yeah,
the church,
I think Neil is
take care
breaking up.
of the girls and the ladies,
yeah.
and so much of it, like, she's as much as involved as Nigel is involved with the church, like, I mean, I'm asking on those.
Yeah. So I agree, Neil. Just to answer your question, I fully agree with you. I think we should look at that part of the compensation as well. Okay. Now that's, I mean, yeah, yeah. We won't. Franco, you want to throw some light on that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a very difficult one because, there is an expectation as well in our culture, or, or the way, whichever streams you are in. And, but the reality is that, husband and wife is a team together, and there is a sacrifice involved. And when a husband is pastoring, or giving leadership to a church, there is pastoring which involves hospitality, involves counseling, and sometimes men can't counsel, in that sense, women. So you need, a lady that then you take her along when you're counseling a couple. So there is that aspect of sacrifice, and I think that's one of the things that maybe as a church, we need to consider, what sort of hours the wife is giving for the ministry, and that is depending upon the church to church. I think the trustees and others have to take that into consideration. If a wife is leading worship or translating, or or so many other things, counseling, hospitality, visits in the evenings, and all that. So yeah, probably it's something that which we need to think about, Colin.
Yeah. So okay, like Franco rightly said, the cultural thing, because for example, in the UK, I know a church leader who says, listen, my wife is not involved in anything. I'm the elder of the church, okay? And he's hired by the church and he's getting paid. Now, because it's like this, his wife didn't have that gifting to be a pastor or whatever. So that was, whereas another elder, his wife was fully involved. So it's not every wife, but depending on the gifting and calling of the wife. And as Franco said, we've got to consider this as well, and just so, but first let's pay the pastor. Okay, moving on to the wife. Okay, so everybody with me so far? Great. So now just to give you some statistics. In the US, the average church attendance or church size on a Sunday morning used to be 75 people. Okay, 75 people. I know we think of mega churches with 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, but the median church size is 75, which has shrunk to 65 now, 65, okay? And for the demographics say for every 75 people in the church, you need one full-time person. Okay, every 75 people, that's the kind of economies of scale that are needed. All right, and out of the tithes and offerings that come in, a maximum of 50% needs to be spent on wages, not more than that, 50%. So these are some industry-wide statistics that I've pulled out. Okay, so everybody clear on that? So it's 75 people, one full-timer. That's the economic model that can supposedly sustain that. Now, of course, in a church that is doing well, you may have much surplus. In a church with poorer people, you may just manage or do these things. You know, it all depends on the hall rent and other expenses that come in. All right. Now, I thought I'd just shed some light on the role of trustees and finance teams, because this has been thrown up a lot, and I thought I'd just share that. Now, let me explain the purpose, the biblical basis of leadership. In the Bible, the church is made up of believers, and those who rule the church or govern the church are the elders, eldership. Okay, that's what the Bible speaks about. There are no trustees spoken about in the Bible. So this is what it is. So you have a church made up of believers. The believers, there are a few elders, and they are responsible for the spiritual decisions and the financial and all the decision making in the church. That's the biblical basis of things. Now, the law in India and other countries has said something that all these organizations like churches and other charities are non-profits, okay, and they need to be governed by a board of trustees. Okay? The law requires trustees. I think trusts require minimum 3, or societies require 7, and so forth. Now, trustees. Now, as Christians, how do we balance the two? Okay, so God's word says you need elders take the decision. Their decision is final. The law says we need trustees. Okay, now what can happen is this, and what has happened. If you look at church history in India, not very far, can anybody tell me what are the things that are happening in the Methodists and the CSI and the other churches regards property? Do you know anything? What is happening?
They're selling off all the old properties.
Selling off all the property. So what is happening now is, since the decision-making power by law is with the trustees, over generations what happens is you have ungodly men who have that power now. They don't care about the church. And they are using the church for their own ends. So prime property is being sold off, and a few individuals are making money out of it. Okay? So that's the reality. Now, so how do we as churches balance that? Now, this is how it is. Now, ideally, the trustees and the eldership should be the same people. Okay? But often a church may have 1, 2 elders or less, and you need 7 trustees. So what do? So in order to fulfill the law, okay, now what churches do is they appoint people, okay, to fill those 7 positions, okay, like most of us have done in our churches, by getting people across the movement.
Colin, now you can do it 3, I think, minimum 3.
Yeah, that's a trust, slightly different from a society, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Okay, so I'll give you the example of Word of Grace. So we started in '95. We formed a society. We had to have 7, 9 members, whatever. But what would happen is, because of how Pune is, and not just Pune, but every city, because of mobility and job, the trustees would keep changing, keep moving, and then we got to change it again, and it was a pain, And so what we've done is we've decided, we got people from among the leadership in other churches to be part of the trustees of our church. Okay? Now, so you want that to happen. At the same time, you want the autonomy of the local leadership. Okay, so there's a balance between the two. So I'll give you an example where it is wonderfully working. It's in Stepping Stones. As you all know, we have a trust called Stepping Stones Charitable Society, which is got 9 trustees, and we've got projects in different places. So, but although we are the trustees, like Franco's a trustee, Nigel, Edgar, myself, and I don't know, we are trustees, and there are different projects. What we've decided is that each local project is autonomous. Okay, that means Krupa in Nasik is handled by James and them. So they are completely responsible for raising their funds, for spending their funds, and so forth. Although we are the trustees, James has got nothing to do with it, but we've recognized him as running that project, and that's the way. All we are making sure is the income and expenses and the things are proper as trustees. Everybody with me? Now, that's a similar thing that we are doing where churches are concerned. So for example, in all our different churches, we are all trustees of different churches, but what we recognize and realize is that, I don't have any authority in Harvest of Grace, although I'm a I've been inducted as a trustee there. I'm there just because they need to fulfill the law. That's it. Clear, everybody? So that's how the trustees thing has been operating in our midst, okay, so far.
And also, if there is no, eldership or leadership, like you just planted a church, and so we become like a sounding board,
Correct.
to help make decisions. Yeah,
that's right. So, and when the church is very new, where there's no leadership team and so all that, then it's good for the ones who have helped plant it to be a sounding board, to guide that church through whatever is happening, and to give confidence to the new people who are going to join. Okay, so is everybody clear on trustees? So now what happens is, when you have trustees in a church, so remember, we are doing this for to fulfill the requirements of the law. Now sometimes trustees, this thing gets to their head, where they say, I'm a trustee, I need to decide whether you should buy a pen or a pin. And that can be very stifling, okay? And whereas that's not the biblical model. The biblical model is the decision making is with the eldership, okay? So for example, the pastor says, I think we need to do evangelism and have a crusade. And the trustees say, no, I don't think we should spend money on that. I think we should spend it on Sundays. Say, no. That's not the role of the trustees. So what is the role of the trustees or a finance committee that is appointed? So I'll share that with you now. Okay. So this is it. So what I would suggest is this. The finance committee, okay. So this is when where you gather people in your church who are sound financially, have a mind for finance and understanding. And what is their role? Okay, this is what their role. They play a key role in caring for the pastor and his wife with regards to expenses, remuneration, etc. So that's the first thing. So we have a finance committee or suitable trustees, not all trustees, suitable trustees who will care for the pastor and his wife. Okay. Secondly, this finance team will help the church leadership in administering the church finances by handling the weekly offerings, banking, accounting, etc. Okay? So what does the finance committee do? They said, listen, for example, at Word of Grace, I've never counted the offering. Okay? We have a team of people who will count it, will make sure it's banked, and so forth. Okay? So that's the role of the finance team to handle that thing. Okay. Third thing that the finance team can do. It provides a useful sounding board for major spending decisions. Listen to me carefully, okay? So, for example, if we're saying, let's say, Ryan feels we need to invest in video equipment, sound equipment, because as COVID is happening, we need to have our meetings online, we're going to have a hybrid meeting, we need sound, we need video, we need this, we need that, and we need to spend 1.5 lakhs on that. Okay, So that decision of a need and to have a hybrid meeting and all that is a spiritual decision. The leadership has taken the decision. Now the finance committee team's role is saying, great, Ryan, we are with you, but there's only 20,000 in the bank account. Get it? So the finance team's role is to provide a useful sounding board for major spending decisions. Okay, and they would play a valuable, hear the word, consultative role in these decisions. Okay, so Ryan would go to Steve and say, guys, we need to spend 1.5 lakhs on all this kind of stuff. We need it. What do you say? So they say, Ryan, great, but or they can say, we have the money, but that's for the salaries. If we buy this stuff, we may not have money for salaries. So you see, the role of the finance is to then bring these financial things to the leadership so that the leadership can look at the decision again, review it, postpone it, or carry forward with that. Okay, and okay. Then the fourth role of the finance committee is to make sure that the accounts are in order, the taxes are filed, there's transparency, and so forth. Okay? And finally, the fifth part of the finance committee is to advise the leadership and to administer in future financial planning through helping with budgets and so forth. Okay? So the fifth thing is the finance committee says, listen, every year we are having a Christmas program. Okay, why don't we budget for that instead of waiting for December? Why don't we budget for, so much is our budget for evangelism, so much is for staff, so much is for children's wear and all that. So the pastor and the leadership and the eldership does not have to get into the nitty-gritty of that. They can share the vision and the finance team can come up with these things. Okay, so let me just review these things. So in a church, you've got the leadership, the eldership or the leadership who are responsible for spiritual and all decisions. You've got the trustees who by law are empowered to handle the things. So there's a delicate balance between the two. What the trustees have got to realize is that although they have the legal rights, okay, but the real decision making is with the eldership. Okay? They are there to serve the eldership, to be a sounding board, to administer these things properly, to plan, to budget, to advise. Okay? But they are not there to control or to veto anything unless it is something absolutely wrong. The pastor says, I think this year it would be good if I had a new Ferrari. Okay, there is money in the bank, and let's buy a Ferrari for all the elders. So in those cases, of course, but in other things, we leave it. Okay, so would anybody like to ask any questions, comment on all what I've shared so far on the finance team and the trustees, or add something that I may have missed out?
Yeah, so just a question. So how often, so again, this is talking about the finance team or the finance committee, so in line to my previous question, how often does one sort of either have a meeting with the finance team, and again, from a visibility perspective, right? If the finance team has that visibility, they will be able to sound off and say, this is the budget, this much money is available, not available, and so on and so forth. So how do you work that, the technicalities of that, that aspect?
Yeah. So I think that would depend from church to church, okay? But I think we can start with, the number one thing is to care for the pastor and his family. That's the first step.
Yeah.
Okay? So now what has happened sadly is our finance teams and trustees have not been informed about their role or not been empowered to do their role. Because I'll tell you what, most trustees feel salary, I don't know, maybe Steve Oliver is looking after it or Franco is looking after it or something, and because they've not been empowered and informed. So, but now we are informing you that in our churches, okay, it's the local leadership, and if the local leadership does not have, if there's only one leader, for example, or two, you may want to get help from the apostolic to come in, you know, like Franco is there, or in UP you've got Nigel and Donald to just come in, or elsewhere, and to say, hey, you know, we need help, you know, to make these decisions, because I can't make the decision myself, you know, especially when it comes to my care, that kind of stuff. So it starts, so in all these areas now, Ryan, start small. Okay, so the first thing is hand over the administration of all these things, the accounts, the offering collection, which must obviously already been happening, to the finance team to handle. Okay, next, you know, they got to work out on caring for the pastor and so forth. So we got to be very careful who we put on the finance team. Okay, because we've heard historically some very bad things that have happened to pastors as a result of immature people on the team. Okay. Immature people, and that can really be a stumbling block.
So my question was in context to also say, for example, what I got to know is Nigel and Donald hadn't got their increase for the last 5 years.
Correct.
Right. And so in that context, obviously, you know, the heart is to give a substantial increase.
Correct.
But how do you decide on the substantial increase? Like, you know, so I had to ask Nigel and say, okay, is there? I mean, do you have enough of funds for it? Like, you know? And obviously when we discussed, he thought it was a small amount, and I and Ajay felt that no, it has to be substantially more than what Nigel thought. And so Nigel said, yes, we have the funds, and so we said, okay, let's go with an X you know, percentage. And so I think some of those things, right, in terms of the trustees of the finance committees, I think there should be a genuine intent in terms of saying we need to care for the pastors or the full-time workers, and you know, for that to happen, there has to be a forum, or there has to be some meeting, maybe quarterly or half yearly, to say, okay, this is how we are trending, or even if you're coming close to the financial year ending where the increase has to be given, then there has to be those planned meetings to say, okay, you know, this is when the meeting has to happen, maybe in the month of December or in Jan, saying that, okay, you're approaching the year ending and raises need to be looked at, and this is the budget, this is how much balance is there, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think, if I may say, I think, Ryan, if you are a trust registered under the government, you know, there is a prerequisite given to all the trust that there's a mandatory requirement of meeting as trustees, or, you know, I think 4 times a month. I mean, 4 times a year, 4 times a year. And there's a budget meeting, there is an AGM. So that means it takes 6 times a week, in a year. And what you discuss is finance. So I think for me, you know, for Tree of Life Church, now it's One Nation Tree, we were a society, so 7 people were required. And we meticulously, religiously, every year we met, you know, like August, September, we'll meet for passing the audited reports. And February we met for budget, and that's when we look at the increase. And there was a decision that was taken that every year there will be a 10% increase. You know, whether we meet or not, there will be a 10% increase. But when we met, you know, there would discussions whether you can give more than 10%, or, you know, whether we can afford. If there is money, why not give? You know, so so you have to make sure you make that kind of meeting happen. And also we always believed every year in the month of July, we share it with the church, what the finance came, you know, what money came, how it is being spent, what was the budget, you know. So there was, you know, I think we did it year after year. So there was an accountability to the church as well. So that also cultivate people to give, because people can see, okay, this year we had 10 lakhs or 20 lakh, 30 lakh, 40 lakh, you know, this is the way to spend. So people also, oh, this is, you know, and that people gave. So I think we got to make it happen, you know. In fact, last week I wrote to some of my people who say we got to have a budget meeting, you know, it's February, we got to legally we need the budget to be passed, and it's been filed to the charity commissioner budget. Very often we don't do it, but sometimes we do it, because if we don't do it, it's a kind of it's not right not to file these reports. So I think as a trust, you got to do it. So when you meet, the discussions will happen, increment and all that. Yeah. So
Yeah. So what Franco said about that, agreeing on that increment now, I think that agreeing on a percentage minimum as a base is very important. So whether you meet or not, that happens.
yeah.
And when you're meeting, you're only deciding, should we give 10 or 12 or 15, that kind of thing, you know, because that empowers whoever, the pastor, the financial people, to say that it has already been passed, we're just implementing it. Because these things can just be forgotten. And Ryan, in your case, when you were talking about Nigel and Donald, I think, you'll need to go through that exercise that we went through. Because what can happen is their base can be very low. I don't know what the salary is or anything. I'm just saying the base can be low. So you need to reevaluate it and to see how that is there.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, anybody else? Anything you want to comment or say, a question? Okay, so just to summarize, remember, you've got the trustees, you've got the elders, and you've got a finance team who could be trustees or could not or may not be trustees, it doesn't matter, but each one knowing their role. Okay, remember, the trustees are there to execute the decisions of the elders. It is not there to put them in check. Okay, and to ensure transparency, like Franco said, to ensure that the budgets are being passed, to ensure that they're meeting, and to ensure that the funds are being collected, they're accounted for. All those very important administrative roles are there with the trustees. Okay, and so that's where it is. Okay, let's move on. Now the question is, how do we determine what we pay somebody? Okay, because we come from very diverse backgrounds. You can have a church in a slum, and you can have a church in South Bombay with two pastors leading. Do they get paid the same? You can have so what I'm trying to get at is there's no one size fits all solution. I've given you principles, but we need the grace of God, okay, to come to something. Now, for the pastors, you got to say, don't feel you are entitled to all this, because being a pastor is a calling. Okay, it's not a profession. You feel God has called you to this, the sacrifice and so forth. Okay, and the other thing we got to beware of is comparison, because you can see, X church may be doing very well and Y church is not, and we can say, hey, I want what he has, and so forth. So this has to be handled very delicately. There's no clear answers on that. Okay, because it all depends on the church. It depends upon the size of the church, the income, and because what do you do when there is no money? Okay, what do you do when there is no money? Yes, Neil, go ahead.
So, Colin, I was just thinking that, in terms of, how God actually spoke to Moses, and, he mentioned about,
Your internet is very patchy.
like, it's
Sorry,
bad
Neil.
word. Okay, I'm so sorry. Am I cracking something?
Neil, maybe you can
It's bad.
phone
Okay.
somebody up and ask them.
I'll just post. I'll try and put in a message.
Okay, please put it in a message because we couldn't get what you were saying. Okay. All right, so while Neil is putting it in a message, okay, we need to say, okay, each situation is different. So number one is don't compare it with another situation. All right, so that is what we need to keep in mind. And this is a challenging thing because different streams and different churches handle things differently. Okay. Neil's question is not yet come. Anyway, so one of the things to keep in mind, is when you're determining remuneration is to say, what is the size of the church? What is the responsibility of the person concerned? Because all full-timers don't need to be paid equally. Remember, the Bible is clear. Those elders whose job is preaching and teaching are worthy of double honor. So there is that aspect to it. Okay. Is the, this came up earlier. What is the wife's involvement in the church? That's another thing, because that can be compensated through the husband. Then, does this person have a gifting that is used beyond the local church? That's another thing, or is it only in the local church? Okay. Then we can look at, is a very important one. Okay, what did the person give up to come full time? That's very important. Okay, what did he give up to come full time? And had he continued there, what was his salary? So those are important things to consider. Then who is he serving? The economic background of the people. All people are valuable, but not all people can generate the same amount of offerings and tithes. So if you're serving a church that is made up of working class people, okay, your offerings will be lower than if you're serving a middle class congregation, obviously. So as a pastor, I cannot demand that, hey, I need these things taken care of. Okay, we've got to say, this is where I am. Money is not coming from anywhere, not from RB, not from Franco. I don't think so. Franco, no, not from Franco. We are responsible to somehow make it happen.
Business.
we've got to depend on God and say, Lord, you've got to make it happen. And I've given you our story and our example, how we had to get into business, worked very hard, all that. God blessed it. And it was only after 7 years that we saw the church grow and do that. So there is that aspect of faith, hard work that is needed. Okay, here's Neil. About a percentage depending on the church giving. How about a percentage depending on the church giving from each church? So Neil, what percentage were you talking about? This is to pay the pastor? Neil, are you there? So does anybody understand the question that Neil has put up there? I'm trying to understand.
I think what he's saying is, how about a percentage depending on the church giving from it? So if the church giving is very low, what he's trying to say, I think, is, can other churches give into it? How about a percentage depending on the church giving from each church, he said, like the Old Testament? So if the church giving is low in one particular church, and it's very low, can other churches support that church?
I think, Colin, you said, in the US, the 75 people is the average, and you said for 75 people, one full-time worker, and 50% of the offering goes for the upkeep or for the personnel. So I think that's his question. Is there a percentage that you can decide, like in the Old Testament? Everyone was given 10% to look after the Levites. I think that's what I think his question is.
Yeah, yes, Franco. And also, not to exclude the wives, keeping in mind, that we can support them with the, whatever it is, whatever's coming in. Also to consider the wives as well, because they are contributing. It's not that they're not.
Yeah, Neil, fully agree with you about the wives. Yeah, that's another. See, we start with first of all, working a proper wage for the pastor. Okay, then we got to consider the wives as well. Okay, now this percentage thing, I wasn't quite sure. Are you talking about? Can you just shed some more light on that? I didn't quite get it.
Colin, I agree with what Ryan said. Definitely looking at whatever comes from outside, we can possibly, provide for them.
Provide for who?
For the leader and their wives as well, like,
Yeah,
who
that's
are
yeah.
actually.
Yeah. So what Franco reminded us, which I said, was, when we're looking after a person before, when a person comes full time, 75 people should be able to look after that one family. Okay, we're looking at that. If you don't have that number, okay, then like what two things can happen. One is somebody can another church or stream can sponsor you and say, okay, we will look after you for 1 year, for 2 years, whatever, to give you sufficient time to build up the congregation. Okay, that is one step. But ideally, it shouldn't go on indefinitely. Because you want to see growth, you want to see each local congregation grow. And now it may take a long time. I'm not saying, I can't say how long. Like for us, it took 7 years. But by the grace of God, we were able to start a business and support ourselves and as well in the church and so forth. Okay, but so 75 people, one full-timer, and about 50% of that of the tithes would roughly. The caveat is that because let's say you have 300 people in the church, very rich people, the tithes are coming in. So what we're saying is 50% is the cap. You're not giving 90% as salaries. 50% is the cap. That's the idea. Now, when the church has less funds, it may go slightly higher, but this is the rough thing that we're talking about. Okay? And so, Neil, when we do church planting, often, we support that couple or whatever for 1 year or 2 years. And this happens in the UK, the US, everywhere. There's a church that will support that. And then that support decreases every year and so forth, because really you want to see a healthy, viable church that's there, that is self-governed, okay, that is self-supporting and is self-propagating. All three things need to be there.
I think like GMI, the Bombay Baptist Church, I think the principle they follow is that if your church is planted, the first year they give 100% support. The second year is 75, third year is 50, fourth year is 25, the fifth year is you're on your own, you got to have your own funds to look after, we planted Washi Church where Frankie and all were there we did this for 6 years. He says, first year, 2 years, we gave 100%. And I think the third and fourth year, we gave 50%. And the fifth and sixth year, I think we gave 25. And I think after that, they handled their own, they went on to look after their own stuff. Yeah.
Excellent. And that's how things work out. Okay. So if you're thinking and saying, hey, I need to be paid more, but you got to say, remember the three options. One, is the money there in the church? Number two, are the people there and there's no money? Then you know what to do. And number three, if the people are not there, we got to just get in more people. All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Are there any questions about how to proceed further? Edgar, Isabel, you're very quiet today.
Edgar is saying, what are you talking about? We have never been supported by anybody from the day one.
There's a lot of background noise here. They're playing cricket outside and they're making a lot of noise. So if I put the thing on.
Sure, understandable. But if you have any questions or thoughts, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, that's what Franco said. Never been supported from the word go.
Yeah. So exactly what Franco said and what Edgar is echoing is that if you're serving a very poor community, now I don't have answers. I'm just bringing things before you. What can you do? I don't know. Because they may never be. Let's give you an example. Let's say, for example, now you take Edgar and Isabel, if I may use them. Edgar and Isabel are a middle-class family. They have a home, they've got a car, they've got everything. But they're serving people who are much poorer. Isn't that right, Edgar?
Yep, that is right.
Okay, so number one, what we've got to take into account is this, that, you know, I don't think they need to come down to the level of that congregation. Okay, and that congregation may not be able to support them at their present level because their expenses may just, you know, cover all the offerings. So how does that work out? You know, so those are questions I'm asking. I don't have answers, but you know, so we've got to look at those. Whereas you may have a situation where you have people who are planting a church like Edgar and Isabel's who are living at the same level as those people, and that's much easier to support. Okay. Now you got Franco's case. Now that is something we need to get into. You know, Franco has not been paid for many, many years. And now somewhere his trustees need to be challenged. Say, what's happening? Okay, so I don't know who your trustees are, Franco, if anybody's here. But, you know, so and that's why we are all here to spur one another to ask the questions. Because, you know, Franco won't bring it up. You know, but we need to bring it up and say, hey guys, this is your responsibility. What are you doing? You know, and so when we go into our own church situations and church plans, we are, and I want to just say that if you guys need outside help, you know, contact Franco, contact myself. We are happy to come in and share or give some advice and so forth. Before we go on to Ryan's question, if anybody has anything else, yeah, Joash.
Yeah, it's related to Uncle Franco's situation where the pastor is also, you know, doing business and handling the church.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that works. I mean, with us, it's more like we are also putting tithes into our own church that we are leading. Does it work that way? That the same thing that you're earning, you're also putting into tithes, and that same thing, does it come back to you? How does it work, like in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, now, for example, in the current situation with Franco, he's not getting a salary, Joash.
No, I'm saying for general, like for example, for me also,
Yeah.
the new church plan that we've done,
Yes.
majority of tithes is actually coming from us because we are also working, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, if we are to ask for tithes at this point, I'm just giving a hypothetical question. This is, but if we are to ask, then is it, if we are the one that are majority putting into the tithes, then is it, are we asking for our own money back again? And this is specifically for those pastors who are working as pastors and as in their business. You know, that's what I'm.
Yeah. So Joash, once you put your tithes into the church offering, it is the church's money, right? And they can pay you. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's no conflict there. You know, if we have another job outside or a business, you know, those tithes, first of all, belong to God. And you're plowing them into, in your case, your local church, which you're also leading. That's perfectly fine. You know, and you may get a salary from that. That is also fine.
Yeah, I think that's where you need people who can think finance, think in terms of how, you know, expensive is living, you know, the living. And asking the hard questions, you know, says how many hours you're putting in for your church, and, you know, for leading the people, preaching, teaching, and come to a you know, a kind of a figure. It says, okay, this is what you're doing for the church, and I think we would like to give you, to pay you, you know. You understand? That's where maturity come. I know of some of the big guys. I'm talking about big guys, you know, the Rick Warren. They get money from their own books, you know, the selling of the books, the whatever, and they get massive money, and they plow that into to their ministry because it's all over the world. But they have a finance team or people who are there to kind of look after them, you know, say, okay, how are you doing? You know, are you living on faith, or is this, you know, you have food at the table? Because I remember Michael Eaton. I don't know how many of you all know Michael Eaton. He's one of the best Bible teacher. and he had an international ministry, and he was part of a church which is called Crisco Fellowship, which was a poor church. Majority was poor, and he was not looked after. So he asked 5 people from international level, says, can you please help me, can you help me to help me look after my wife and my children and my family? And they helped him, and they became his team who asked the difficult question. And they would speak to the church, they would speak to other ministries where he's traveling to different nations. Says, guys, you got to plow into his ministry and you got to look after him. He's got flight tickets, he's coming to India, he's going to Nigeria, nobody is paying his flight ticket. Can you all pay the flight ticket? So he kind of created a team. So I think that's where some of the big guys work. And I know in New Life, people plant out, poor churches, or, like Edgar and Isabel go into a slum and start a church. And they've been given permission to link to ministries where they can be supported. You understand? So they link into some ministries who have resources, who are interested in the work that you're doing, and they kind of, with the knowledge of the Pastor Joseph or Shelton or whatever, whoever, and they kind of get support for their ministry. So they have different ways, different streams work differently. So, but the principle, I think Colin is saying, if you're working, if you're laboring in the vineyard, you need to be supported. You need to be, people need to think of you,
Yeah.
And I think for Edgar, who thinks of him,
Yeah.
who among us, in his church, think of him as does he have money to, have insurance? Or does he have money to, to have whatever, and someone need to think, whether it's in the local church, whether it's in the stream that you belong to, somebody is thinking of you. Somebody is asking the difficult question. How is your wife coping with what you're doing? So then linking things to see that the couple is taken care of,
So I have a question in this contest. Like you shared, if the church is a rural church without much income, in that case, can other churches support? Like it's written in 2 Corinthians 8:14 that one church lacks the other supplies. Like Jerusalem church was supported by was Paul asked Corinthians to support those churches. So
yeah. Very good. I think the biblical principle is when there is a great need, where there was a big famine, all churches got together to help the Jerusalem church. But it didn't become a norm that, everybody continue helping, but there may be a season that some church needed to be helped, but that need to be relooked at again and again, otherwise, what can I know of churches, because they get support from abroad, and that church doesn't grow in some ways because you feel, oh, I'm getting support, year after year getting support, and you say, oh, this is a very, other than you're saying, I need to grow my church, I need to bring in some people with money, people with middle class or whatever, so that I can have resources within me, within the church, or, whatever, so I think there is no permanent lasting thing which, forever this is going to be the way, you understand.
Yeah.
There's seasons.
Yeah. So Manish, to answer your question, there are times where churches may be in need, and other churches, and especially when you're part of a stream movement like RB, Regions Beyond, for example, during the COVID time, so much help came, Franco, to help people who are suffering with COVID, with rations, and all that happened. So that has happened. But as Franco said, it would be unhealthy to carry it on an ongoing basis, and what happens is, now this has happened in places where, like, for example, people from the UK have gone to Africa to serve. Okay, now they are living in Africa, but at a UK standard of living. Okay, and so the cost to support them is phenomenal. Now take in India, when you have somebody from the US or the UK who comes here to serve, Okay, they are living at a certain, at the standard of living. They are, you know, not the same standard of living as they're living there, but what we would call a higher standard of living. And the cost, I think KP Yohanan is the one who wrote a book on this, and the cost of supporting that family is huge compared to the cost of supporting an Indian family. Okay, so we've got to consider that context as well. And you know, and the ideal thing is where each church is self-governing. You have your own leadership. It is self-propagating. It's proclaiming the gospel and growing, and it's self-supporting. Is able to raise the resources for it to grow. You know, when that happens, we'll see a great expansion of the kingdom.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Gurmeet.
Yeah, Colin, I've been listening and agree with all that you say, but I'm just thinking like the trustees and the finance team, and you know, I was just thinking in a city like Jalandhar, you know, and India's most cities are like 2-tier or 3-tier cities, where people don't earn like cities like Mumbai or Delhi, or, you know.
Yes.
Our church, we have most people who are laborers, and there are very few who are like, now Manu is doing business. So, you know, we bank on him quite a lot. How does all this work? Because our offering is still quite low, and you know, our expenses are, you know, hiring, renting the place and everything else. And we want to do ministries, we want to, you know, reach out and do mission and all of that. And how does all this work? You know, that's what is going in my mind. How do we move ahead? Because this is a very real sort of situation, you know. And most, so, you know, in India, in the rural areas, people go, they do ministries, and of course, it's a bad thing, that bad model of just taking all the offering, and there is no accountability, and there is no team, nothing, which is very bad. But how can we do proper? But then the finance is a big question, because you will not, you know, you can't think of getting the same offering, collecting the same offering that cities like Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore would collect. Of course, God does miracles, but it is, you know, practically very unlikely. So I'm thinking like our church, will we ever come to a place where we are able to give a full-time, you know, salary to a full-time person? Now we are almost 100 people. In fact, a little more than 100. But will we ever come to a place where we will be able to support a you know, full-time pastor? So these are the questions in my mind, which we need to really think, because we are going to be reaching out to the, you know, parts of like, for example, at one point of why we all know that Edgar had kind of tried that thing of handing over the church to, you know, his other leaders, and somehow like they had to work and look after the church. Things didn't work out and all, but just.
Yeah, Franco, you have any wisdom on this?
Yeah, I think there is no, you know, what I can say, a proper answer, you know, stereotype answer. I think it's a journey, and I think we need to, I think when you are a church, I think you need to think of, I would say, a financial ecosystem, you know, in the sense what could really help you and help you serving full time, or you serving the church and having probably translocal ministries. You know, you're not just local, but even sometimes there's a translocal ministry. How can you build that ecosystem? And I think I think that's been a challenge for many. Some are able to, some are not able to, depending upon the gifting of that leader, you know. And I think in such cases, I think you need to kind of partner with somebody who can help you, someone, you know, and a team that can help you, you know. And I really believe in some ways, not because of you know, just my own church, but I feel, as Colin said, you know, being a pastor is the call of God. You know, you step out because God has called you, and you believe God will sustain you through your journey. And my my confidence, and if we do, you know, God gives the vision, God makes the provision as well. And if we do God's way, we do biblical way from the beginning itself, there's a, you know, there is a kind of, there's a cushioning effect. You know, you begin to see God's faithfulness. And I'm not saying, you know, you're not doing it, but maybe it's not your gifting to do, but so you bring in someone, or you ask people to help. And in the beginning itself, you know, I think nowadays I'm listening to many churches, like we have Sydney, who is leading Living Word Church, and he said recently, he said he's the last full-time person going to work for Living Word. You know, he says from now on there's no full-time person. And I said, okay, so what does that mean? Explain, what does that mean? Which mean there will be people who are bivocational. They may be people who are doing something and doing the ministry, looking after the church or whatever. So how do you come to that place, you know? And in a city, maybe it's possible because you have enough number of people, but in other cities, like the two-tier cities you spoke about, yeah, I said there's no you know, right or wrong answer. But I think as you plant out, I think Colin, you know, after a few years, he said, okay, I need to have an ecosystem. I need to do a little bit of business, and I need to bring some people who think business or think finance, and I need to take their help and share my needs and believe God will do something. Am I right, Colin?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and I think even for me, you know, when I got married, I was getting 2,500 rupees. And for 3-4 years after marriage, you know, that was it, you know, 3,000, 3,500. How do you live in a city, you know?
those are the days.
Those are the days, you know. And, but God sustained somehow.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So Gurmeet, just to answer your question, you know, number one is, you said you have about 100 people in the church. So the next question is, have they been taught to tithe, and are they tithing? Okay. Because I don't know what percentage of those 100 are working and earning, but that's the first step, I think, where you need to move towards, where we are teaching and encouraging our people. It's a journey, you know, it doesn't happen immediately, and 100% won't tithe. That's in every church. But we are teaching them about living God's way. This is what it is. Okay? Secondly, if, you know, even if 100% are tithing, but the salaries are so low that it's not enough, you know, then that's a unique situation. Okay? And in that situation, as other streams are doing, is they said, well, in that case, what did Paul do? You know, Paul, at times he worked, he was a tent maker, he supported himself. At other times he didn't work, others supported him. You know, so we've got to see what season are we in, where you may say, or whoever's leading say, well, I need to work and at the same time lead the church because there's no money. You know, the people are faithful in tithing. You know, it needs to grow from 100 to 200 in order to support somebody, and so forth. So there is that. Because outside help may come, but it won't come forever. It'll just come for a season. you know, and that outside help comes to give you that boost to be able to grow till such time as you're self-sufficient. So, and like Franco mentioned about Sydney, there are other streams that have taken similar decisions, you know, where they say, we don't want full-time people, we just, because it's too expensive, we don't know, we're just looking to see 100 people and then we plant out, 100 people and plant out, you know. So some people have gone that route, you know, and so there's no right and wrong, you know, but I think we're going to be losing out on something if we don't have full-time pastors in the years to come. Okay, and we've got to see how to handle it, because Ryan asked a very important question: what about retirement?
Yeah.
But
It was
Edgar's got his
Andrew's,
hand up.
it was Andrew's question. Just copy pasted it again.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, anyway,
Edgar's got his
Thanks,
hand
Ryan.
up. Edgar.
Yeah, I thought if I could share a little bit about my journey as well, but and do it in short. When God spoke to us to start the church, I had a conversation like Moses had, right? In that argument with God. And first of all, I didn't feel like I was pastoral. I didn't feel I was supposed to pastor a church, and so that argument was there. But again, like we are saying, no, it's the call. It's the call of God, and if the call is there, then the provision also follows. And I realized that we didn't get any support at all from any church, because that time, in fact, to start the church, I was thrown out of the church. So in the sense, so I didn't get any support in that context. But I just felt, God called me to do this, and so I moved there, and I had a good job actually. When I started the church, I had a good job. It was the first job that could actually sustain me. And then halfway through, just as soon as we started, the Lord told me to quit that job. And I felt like, I was not hearing right, because it was a real good job and it was real close by. It had lovely timings and everything. And I felt God telling me to quit. At that time, when God told me to quit, I remember having a conversation with Sydney, and he was saying that, Arey, now we are telling people not to quit their jobs and, not to go full time. And I remember replying to him that even today people have faith, Sydney, and it's a matter of faith, and it's a matter of calling. And I remember when I was going to quit, I said, Lord, my normal advice to people is, when you quit one job and you're going to join another job, you make sure that you're getting another job and then you quit. You don't just leave one job and then you're hanging with nowhere and then you don't know where. So I said, Lord, you show me that you are going to provide for me. My children's education are coming and the fees have to be paid. And if you're telling me to go and start a church in a slum, obviously they're not going to be able to provide anything. So how am I going to be sustained for? And God said, okay, you quit your job and I'll sustain you. I said, no. The principle is that you show me you're sustaining me and then I quit my job. And it's like when God tells you to go and then you just go. So I left, and let's say I put my resignation in October and they only accepted my resignation in April. And after I put my resignation letter into the bank, within that time, somebody came and offered to sustain me for a year, and almost as much as the bank had offered me. And I was so shocked at God's, his provision, and he fulfilled both in one sense. And so that happened. And again, there came a time that 1 year got over. I think he increased it to another 1 year, and then he stopped supporting me. But again, you're in a church slum, and obviously, where's the sustenance going to come from? And God said, I will sustain you. And he provided this business, my mom's business. At that time, my mom couldn't support the thing. And so we were managing the parlor, which is in Bombay from Nasik. So literally, Isabel, because it was a ladies' parlor, my wife used to go to Bombay, serve over there. And, and I would go and I would buy the stuff that was required. And we did that because obviously the church would not be able to sustain us in any way. And then after some time, we found somebody, my son's mother-in-law right now, to run the parlor. And she now runs it, and we are supported through that method. So, but God made a provision. Like, I think where faith comes in and our ability to trust God, and God really. So I remember sitting with my family, and I thought, like, no, I'm not hearing God. Maybe I'm wrong in hearing God. So I sat with my family and told them, this is what God spoke to me. My son was there. He's here. He can vouch for it as well. And I thought that they would use common sense and say, no, Dad, this is not from God. You should not give up this job. It's a good job. You can do both together. But no, this family of mine is also full of faith. They say, oh, if God has spoken to you, what are you still doing in the job? And I explained to them, once I leave this job, I don't know whether we'll be provided for well or anything of the sort. But after I quit my job, things were getting even more better, and we were so well provided for by God. It was like they saying, Dad, you said you're going to see hard days. Where are the hard days going to come? And really, God provided for, and I feel like God does provide, and He does come in, and He does support and help. But I also feel like that there needs to be wisdom in handling the finances that God gives us. Like when God supplies, are we wise in handling the finances that God has given us? Because when God supplies, and if we are unwise and we foolishly deal with the things that God has given us, we will lose it.
Yeah.
And we will not be sort of in that sense sustained for. So that's one of the things that I have. That's my journey basically. If for Gurmeet to answer your question in how God has provided for that situation. And even when we had raised these elders and leaders up, I had literally found people who would sponsor them on a sustained basis for them. But they didn't they didn't have the maturity to endure the hardship that comes with managing a church in a slum, which is very volatile and has a lot of issues. So I realized that that maturity that comes to be able to endure the hardship, endure the difficulties, take the abuses, take the violence literally, and still be loving and kind and tender and merciful in a situation like that. It took more. I was in a mistake like that. I think Franco was warning me about these things, but I didn't pay attention to his warnings, and I went ahead and acted foolishly and sort of paying the price for it. But that's the journey. Okay, just for.
Thank you so much, Edgar. And what Edgar shared is, once again, he's confirmed what I've said. Being a full-time minister of the Lord is a calling. Unless you have heard God about it, don't step into it. Because when the hard times come, you'll be able to press on in faith, knowing that God has called you. That is what will sustain you. And you heard Edgar sharing, about his wife working hard to support the ministry, going to Bombay. So there is that partnership. If your wife is not with you, it's very difficult to move ahead in this thing. Okay? And at the end of the day, wherever our provision comes from, is it from the church? Is it from somebody else? Is it God?
Whole family was part of it.
The whole family was part of it. And that's great, And so it's a faith move.
That's true, Colin. Yeah, I think another lesson is that we don't become God to people, Sometimes they have faith and you feel bad and say, oh, you need to be supported. Let me find something, then they're saying, no, I have faith. I believe, God, I'm willing to go through what I'm going through because God has called me. So we got to honor that as well. It's not that we become God to people or God to churches. I think that's what the Americans have done to churches in Nepal and churches in the poor nations. They became God to them. He says, okay, we'll supply you, we'll pray for you, we'll give you the DLP, the OHP, we'll give you the PA system and all that. You run the church. Other than they having faith for their people, I think that's the other side.
The other side. Okay, now Ryan asked an important question. What about the retirement of the pastor? Now, you see, we are all first-generation churches, okay? Most of us. I think there are only, if you take all of New Frontiers, there may be a couple of churches where people have retired or on the verge of retiring. Living Word, where you have David, is I think the first one. And this is, a very advanced question, because really we haven't even, at this stage we are talking about paying pastors, okay? Not even about their retirement. that which is a more advanced question, which is planning for the future. So as of now, there is no answer that I can think of. I mean, we've got some thoughts, but
Yeah.
anybody got any
Colin,
thoughts?
Colin, like what companies do is they invest some amount for pension and all those things.
Yeah.
So shouldn't the trustees consider doing that now itself so that they can plan for their retirement?
Yeah. Now that is a great possibility for younger people. Okay.
You
But
know,
if you take
can I?
Nigel, Franco, Edgar, myself, Nigel is in his 60s, I'm 55, we are all in our 55, you know. So I think whatever we start doing now may make a slight difference, but not a major difference. But it's something to consider. I mean, which is Ryan absolutely right, because we got to think about that. You know.
So
And
what
maybe
I did was the people who I employed in the services, I used to do what we did in the companies, you know, deduct PPF and deduct some things like that. But in our case, the pastor is not getting paid enough to deduct anything from it.
That was the situation as well, you know. That is the situation. So I think let's start. I mean, retirement is thinking about that is good. We need to think about it. But I'm saying let's start with the basic thing here about the salaries, and then we move to this thing. So Ryan, it's a good thing. We must do it, you know, and it can be considered with the whole package. But because we've not come to that stage, unfortunately, we'll hit it in a few years. But I'll give you some examples of what have happened in India. What has happened in India is, say, when the senior pastor or is on the verge of retiring, he doesn't retire immediately. Okay, few years before he retires, he is working alongside another team or another pastor, and there is a gradual transition happening. The baton is being passed from one to the other, but it's not like in a race immediately. It's over a period of time. Okay, so that's one step. The other thing is, you know, as the time goes by, the pastor's salary, who's retiring, comes down and it decreases, you know, and so there is that thing to be considered. So that way you have a new team and he is retired almost in more of an advisory capacity. So the financial team needs to decide how much they're going to pay the pastor. And the third thing that has happened in a situation is where the pastor retiring has been paid a lump sum. Okay, just to get him going, you know, to say, okay, we've not given you anything all these years, now we're giving you this thing, you know, in addition to the other things we were talking about. Because it's true, you know, we need to not only care for people who've given up everything to serve the Lord for their day-to-day needs, but also when they retire. Because what do they do when they retire? You know, and this is a very real situation.
yeah, I think we learned from experience. You know, when we were young, nobody thought about insurance. Nobody thought about, you know, term insurance or PPF or, you know, anything like that, you know. But I think now we are thinking, I think, you know, even in our church, we have two young full-timers, one in Virar, one here. I think we have PPF provision, we have Mediclaim provision, we have something, you know, for their insurance, so that they're not just the immediate needs, but also the future needs. So
excellent.
I think we need to encourage everyone who is younger people, you know, who are into serving. We got to just encourage them with that. Yeah.
All right. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. Okay, our time is also running out, and so if you are leading a church, you know, I think you could get a team together. If you don't have a team, get any of us to come in if you want to speak to the team so that they are empowered and informed about their role and so forth. And, you know, and you could talk to us and say, hey, I need somebody to look into my situation, you know, and because that's being vulnerable and saying, listen, nobody's looking after me, you know, I can't look after myself. Can you do something? As a next step forward, you know, and whenever you're designing this package, it's good to get a few minds together to help you, because each situation is very difficult, very different rather, you know, and there are so many factors need to be considered. Every pastor does not need to be paid the same, and it all depends on experience, you know, fruitfulness. There's also responsibility, gifting, and so many other things, you know. So yeah, there's no one size fits all. But I hope this time together has just opened our minds to an important area that needs to be addressed, because it'll be very sad if we don't see anybody in a full time into ministry after we retire. Yeah? And yeah, just thought. So,
Thanks, Colin.
sure.
Very helpful. Very helpful. I think this will generate a lot of questions, and probably maybe we'll have, after 1 or 2 months, maybe we can have a session like this again, maybe touching on different things. And or sometime, if you give us feedback, then maybe we can do something. And I think there are lots of questions. I think as you think about, there are lots of questions that will come, you know. And I think even now, you know, with a lot of we are on, you know, virtual churches, you know, it's not physically meeting, and people are linking into different ministries, and you hear about some need there, and so I'll route my tithes to that church, and you know, I'll route my tithes to that ministry, and there are people giving like that, you know. So that is going to affect, you know. So I think we need to teach, and we need to pray that, you know, people will give, and you know, churches would be sustained and needs could be met. And yeah, I will really like some feedback. I think, Colin, I think you touched more issues today, which is very helpful. And yeah, so if you have, you know, if you have any feedback, please give us some feedback so that we can have look at those issues and maybe address it next time when we meet.
Franco, I think I was thinking about if we can look at some of the best practices all over the world about what the churches or organizations are doing to do something about in the area of leader care, you know, including the present practice and also the future practice. I think that will be great.
Very good, Bal. You know, I have attended one of Malcolm's session talking about transition and looking at the finance. So there are good practices happening elsewhere. Probably we can, you know, look at those things, and we can bring in those principles to help. Very good suggestion, Bal. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, but I just want to throw in one thing here. Is, you know, if we take a step of faith, Christianity is all about faith, right? And if you're on a finance team and you're saying, hey, you know, we need to care for the pastor and his wife, he's being paid X, he really needs to be paid 1.5X or 2X or whatever it is. And as a team, you're saying, listen, you know, worker is worthy of his wages. We need to do this, and we need to trust God for the finances. Okay? And I tell you, we've done that at Word of Grace, and we've just seen the blessing of God. And I want to encourage you guys to, you know, we're stepping out in faith, and we're doing that.
Yeah.
So it's a faith thing. Yeah. And it's also fulfilling our God-given responsibility, you know, as the team or the trustees, you know, we've got to look at it and say, hey, you know, how can we care for Franco? How can we care for this thing, and so forth.
Man.
Superb, Colin. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Welcome, guys. It was good to be together this last couple of weekends, and something very new. Yeah.
Man, thank you. Ryan, you want to just end with a prayer, thanking God? Yes, Edgar, you were saying something.
I said thank you, Colin, and thank you, Franco. Very helpful.
Great. Welcome.
You want me to pray, Franco?
Yes, please.
Yes, Lord. Father, we thank you for this time, Lord, these 2 weeks that we've spent, Lord, just looking at how we can move forward in caring for pastors and full-time workers, Lord. And Lord, I pray that, Lord, the truth that we've looked at, your word that we looked at, truly shape our thinking, shape our thought process, our mindset, Lord, Father. And Lord, that, Lord, your word says, Lord, that we are called to be listeners and ones who, Lord, obey your word, Lord. And so, Lord, help us as each one of us who are part of trustees, Lord, or might be a part of being a trustee, Lord, in various churches, Lord, that we will, Lord, take your word, Lord, and put it to practice, Lord, God, that we will, Lord, help each one of us, Lord, to really
Yes.
get things moving in these days ahead, Lord, in the months ahead, or weeks ahead,
Yes.
Lord, that
Yes.
truly we would come together, call for meetings, be proactive, Lord, and really look at, Lord, caring for, Lord, pastors and full-time workers, Lord, and truly we would see, Lord, their lives being blessed, even as, Lord, many who've been ahead of us, Lord, have really given, Lord, to building your kingdom and serving the church full time over the last so many years, Lord. So I just pray for that, your grace, your strength, your leading, Lord, in these days, in this month ahead, Lord. Thank you for Colin, Lord, who's stirred our hearts, Lord, with your word and the truth, Lord, and just pray for your blessing upon him, and that, Lord, that you would use him, Lord, in various other churches as well to, Lord, make a difference, and Lord, Lord, on this very topic, Lord, that churches will be shaped, Lord, the congregation will be stirred to even give, Lord, Father. We just pray and ask you this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
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 Man, thank you
Amen.
guys.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Guys, lovely
Thanks,
to see you.
Franco.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Franco.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bal, if you have any teaching on this, as you said, good practices,
Yeah,
pass
please
it
share it
on.
with
Yeah,
others.
please share it, Bal.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Edgar.
All right. Thanks, Edgar. Bye.
Bye.
Well,
Bye,
you
everyone.
guys.
Bye.